Financial Planner. Follow us on YouTube.
Layer by layer, the cabal is being exposed to the world. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, it looks like Trump is making his move to repeal the individual mandate from Obamacare. Now, we discussed Obamacare yesterday, and we know the corporate media is out there trying to convince us that the sign-ups, they're just better than ever. And it really makes no sense whatsoever. We know that half the exchanges are bankrupt. We understand the premiums are skyrocketing. People are losing their jobs. And we need to really dig through all these numbers and see what's really going on. And we know from the past that they included those individuals that have signed up before, those individuals that are being subsidized, and they manipulate those numbers, but they never report on the people that opted out. And that number is normally the same or even larger than those people who signed up before. And those people who signed up before, they had insurance before, and all they did was move over to Obamacare. So we're not really seeing any big difference here. What we're seeing is a complete breakdown because more and more insurers, they're stepping away from Obamacare. And like I said, if it was so great, why did the government exempt themselves? They should have got rid of their crappy insurance and taken Obamacare. But we see right now the CBO, and the CBO, they, sometimes hit it with their calculations of how well this is going to be and how well it's going to work out. But they came out and they're supporting Trump right now, saying, yes, we calculated the individual mandate, and if we got rid of it, it would save $338 billion over 10 years. Now, who cares about that? What I care about is the everyday individual person, where they don't have to pay taxes, where it will free their currency up, where maybe they can pay for their rent, maybe they can pay for more food, or pay for whatever they need to pay for, instead of it going towards taxes. And we can see right now they're going to try to make a play for this and use this to try to get rid of it. And I think they should get rid of it. Actually, I think the whole thing should be scrapped and gotten rid of completely. We see that the cabal, they are in big trouble right now. Layer by layer, the cabal is being exposed to the world. And we're starting to see all this information coming out. And remember, way back earlier this summer, we saw that there was this meeting between Donald Trump Jr., the Russian lawyer Natalia, and they said, this is all Russian collusion. And we knew this was a complete setup. We knew that Clinton was all part of this. We knew that the cabal was all part of this. We knew that Fusion GPS was orchestrated and directed and paid by the cabal. And what we're starting to see right now is that, according to a report, hours before the lawyer Natalia sat down with Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner at Trump Tower on June 9, 2016, she was with Fusion GPS co-founder and former Wall Street Journal reporter Glenn Simpson in a federal Manhattan courtroom. The pair were together shortly after the Trump Jr. meeting as well. Of course, this is an intriguing new development because just a couple of months prior to these events, Fusion GPS was paid at least $1 million by Hillary's campaign and the DNC to prove that Trump was working with the Russians. All of which begs the obvious question, was the whole Trump Jr. fiasco nothing more than a failed attempt to sabotage the Trump campaign, to make it look like there was Russian collusion, to make sure that Hillary won the presidency? And this is exactly what this was all about. And we're starting to see that this is all starting to fall apart completely. Now, not only were Simpson and the Russian lawyer Natalia, together before the Trump Jr. meeting, as it turns out, Fusion GPS was hired by the Baker Hostetler to represent Russian firm Prevezon in an asset forfeiture case, a firm which Russian lawyer Natalia also represented and was the reason that she was in the U.S. in the first place. Now, to summarize, Fusion GPS and the Russian lawyer Natalia were effectively co-workers defending a Putin-linked Russian operative on trial in the U.S. for a massive $230 million money laundering fraud. And we can see right now, this whole thing where they're trying to show Russian collusion, well, it's falling apart because we're seeing that this was all paid for, that they were dealing with the Russians. They work with the Russians with the Uranium One deal. John McCain knew about it. And it's all starting to come out and fall apart. And, of course, the corporate media, they're staying away from it. They don't want to really report on it. But eventually what's going to happen is that all this information is going to come out. And we're going to see a lot more information come out. Now, we know that the Cabal has been trying to control free speech, which, if you control it, it's not really free speech. Political correctness is a form of control. And they were trying to control it with hate speech because they wanted to tell you what hate speech was. They were going to define it for you so this way they can control it. So we see the Cato Institute. They did a 2017 free speech and tolerance survey, and they found something very interesting. That the overwhelming majority, 82% of Americans, agree that it would be hard to ban hate speech because people can't agree what hate speech is, which hate speech is hateful. 17% disagree with this. And they did this across many different cities, many different individuals, Democrats, Republicans. And once again, this is the problem with controlling free speech and saying, ooh, that's hateful. That's political correctness, because everyone has a different definition. And we discussed this before. Because you cannot just say that's hate speech because to one group it's not really hate. To another group it is. For example, they said, how do Americans define hate speech? When presented with specific statements and ideas, Americans can agree on what hate speech is, what's offensive, what's hateful. Now, for instance, a majority of Democrats, 52%, believe saying that transgender people have a mental disorder is hate speech. Only 17% of Republicans agree. On the other hand, 42% of Republicans believe it's hateful to say that police are racist, while only 19% of Democrats agree. And this goes on and on and on and on. This is why when we talk about freedom of speech, it's freedom of all speech. You can say whatever you want. It doesn't mean that people have to agree with you. And if you don't agree with it, don't listen. It's as simple as that. And this is why the Founding Fathers never designated, well, this is hateful, you can't say this is political correctness. This is why it says freedom of speech, freedom of the press. It doesn't say the corporate media press. It doesn't say the alternative media press. It says freedom of the press. And it doesn't say you have to be certified to write something down and say this is newsworthy. Let the people make their own choice. People can look at it and say, you know something? I'm going to check this out. I don't believe this is true. You know something? I don't like what you're saying, so I'm not going to listen anymore. Ooh, I like what you're saying, so I am going to listen. And this is why this agenda of hate speech, political correctness is all going to fall apart. And actually, if you ever saw or read the book The Giver, they use precision of language where they kind of changed the meanings of words and they took out words you weren't allowed to use, and people really didn't understand what they were doing, and they used different words to describe it, so it kind of confused all these people, and over generation, they had no idea that they were like killing babies. They said they were putting them to sleep. They didn't realize it was murder. And this is what they wanted to do here in the United States. They wanted to confuse everyone and control how people thought, what people said. And right now we can see that this is falling apart. We see the EU, they're going to impose arms embargo on Venezuela. And it looks like they're laying out the basis for sanctions. They're going to join the U.S., where they're going to sanction Venezuela. Now, will this work? Most likely not, because Venezuela is now shifting, moving away from the dollar, moving away from the euro, moving towards the yuan. And once they fully go onto the yuan, use the ruble, make deals with China and Russia, these sanctions are not going to work whatsoever. We see right now U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis has arrived at NATO's Brussels headquarters because they are discussing what they're going to do in the Middle East. Because what's happening right now is that Russia and Syria, the Iraqi armed forces, they have removed the Islamic State, and it's a matter of weeks, and before you know it, they're going to be asked to leave. And now they're saying, okay, how or what do we do at this point? And they're meeting with NATO to discuss how they're going to remove themselves from the situation. And I do believe that Russia and Syria, they're going to come out, and Iraq is going to come out and say, listen, we don't need the U.S. troops here anymore. They need to leave, and we're going to have to see how the U.S. responds at that time. We see Russia is boosting trade with Japan right now. Trade between Russia and Japan has surged 17% in the first 8 months of the year. In the beginning of 2016 to the end of 2016, trade was pretty darn bad, but it looks like things are really picking up. Japan and Russia are becoming closer and closer. Moscow has also suggested building a road and rail bridge from Russia to Japan, and this would interlink the One Belt, One Road system. So we can see that they're all prepping for the Belt and Road, and there's going to be trade all throughout Europe, all throughout Asia, all throughout Africa, leading into South America, and maybe the U.S. will have to see how that plays out. We see out in Ukraine has canceled their arms agreement with Russia, and we see right now that they're not going to accept any arms or parts or anything from Russia. It has been completely canceled, and the UN is warning of a chlorine gas disaster in Ukraine, because what we're seeing right now is that the fighting between the southeastern people and the Ukrainian troops has intensified near water, electricity, and gas stations, threatening supplies in the Donetsk region as winter approaches. And what they're saying is that there are chlorine gas tanks in this area, and if they get hit or something happens, we can see that within 200 meters, these individuals might receive fatal doses of the poison gas, and they're very concerned about this, and we can see things are really starting to flare up in this area. Because you have to remember, the Cabal, they're not satisfied in what is happening here, because they're losing ground in all different areas, and they need to have something started here, and they're trying as hard as they possibly can to have things pushed to make sure that their agenda is achieved. Their goal is achieved by having war, and it looks like it is not happening at all. We see out in Yemen, well, it looks like the Saudi forces, they have ended the blockade on Yemen's port of Aden. Now, does this mean the war is over? No, but it might be a sign that Saudi might be pulling back, or this might be a decoy designed to send in an insincere message to the wider world that the conflict is winding down, and all of a sudden they spring something on the Yemeni forces and the Yemeni people. We've seen this before. So this is something that we have to watch, but the blockade has been lifted, and we're going to see a lot of aid come into Yemen, because the people there are definitely suffering. We see that the Syrian general in Deir ez-Zor, because we know that Deir ez-Zor has been liberated from the Islamic State. This is the last stronghold of the Islamic State. And what they found there were suicide vests, and they found them on dead militants, and they were explaining what they used these for. And according to the Syrian brigadier general, the tactics the terrorists used was to deploy so-called suicide units, and they wear these vests and they try to cause as much damage as possible in different areas, and they just blew themselves up. And this is very interesting, because these are the paid mercenaries, and they also took these vests and put it on people and blew them up. And we can see right now that this was part of the United States, the Cabal, the paid mercenaries, Israel, the coalition forces. They used these individuals, and they forced individuals to wear these vests and spread terror throughout all these different towns, cities, and villages. We see the OPCW, the UN investigation. They're out with their report, and they're saying that, yes, Syria, they used chemical weapons, and Russia is out there saying, yeah, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now remember, the UN didn't actually have investigators go to the site. You know, that entire site that was staged at the time, where they showed individuals not wearing masks, wearing cotton gloves, showing people getting hit with sarin, and the whole thing was debunked. Now, Nikki Haley, she was out there, And she's saying, look at the children, look at the people that got caught in this, look at the sick people. But once again, that is not proof. That's just showing the aftermath. And Russia's saying this whole thing makes no sense. There was no investigative team. They took the Milton's investigation. They used that. They used the White Helmets investigation. And the UN never sent individuals to the site. Now, other individuals are looking at this, and they are looking at the explosion on the street, saying that the shell obliteration suggests high explosive, a munition designed not conducive with a chemical payload. And once again, we had a professor look at this, said the same exact thing. And of course, the US, the Cabal, is trying to use the same exact tactic, trying to use this report, and it's just not going to work. It's a dead end. We see that the Syrian opposition had a lot more motive to use chemical weapons and chemical attacks on the people of Syria, on the Syrian forces, than the government of Syria to use it on their own people. Now think about this. Why would Assad, if the people are supporting Assad, he's bringing in Russia, why would he use chemical weapons on his own people? It makes no sense. The whole story doesn't make sense. It would be like George Washington turning around and firing on his own people, or using gas on his own people, then going and fighting the terrorists. It makes no sense. It'd make more sense if the terrorists were using the chemical weapons on the people and using it on the forces of George Washington. And again, this story has never made any sense, but they were trying to push it to make it look like Assad was this evil individual where he's using this on his own people, but the people elected him, the people supported him, the people, all the refugees are coming back into Syria. So if he was so terrible and he was torturing, using chemical weapons on all these people, why have 1.6 million people returned to Syria? They would have just stayed out of Syria. But it makes no sense because the whole thing was propaganda once again. We see that the Islamic State hackers, most likely the intelligence community, Mossad and the rest, have been hacking 800 school websites in the U.S. to show users pictures of Saddam Hussein with the text, "I love the Islamic State." Now, what we're seeing here is they're building the propaganda that the Islamic State has this power to cyber attack, has the power to push their agenda, to show that Saddam Hussein was with or supported the Islamic State. The whole thing is completely made up, and the whole thing is being pushed by the intelligence community to convince us that the Islamic State once again is coming here to the United States, to Europe, to cause havoc in the country. And as we know, the U.S., the coalition forces, Mossad, they're the ones who created the Islamic State. They're the ones who supported them, funded them. So what they're really saying is that the Cabal, those individuals that are losing the war out in the world, where they're being exposed, they're coming to get us. They're going to have terror in all these areas. That's what they're really saying. And this is what I've been talking about. They are preparing and getting ready to push the major event because they need to distract from all of this. Because if they don't, well, they're going down. And we can see right now, time is ticking by, and they're running out of time. What is happening right now? The economy is completely falling apart. They're losing the Middle East. North Korea is on the verge of having peace, and they can't get a war started anywhere. They're trying with Iran. It is not working. First of all, Iran is not going to get into a war. There is no reason for them to get into a war. There's no reason to fire missiles at Saudi Arabia. There's no reason for them to attack anyone. This is the dream of the Cabal, of these individuals in all these different countries and the intelligence agencies, to start this war to cover up everything that's been going on. And it's all failing right now. It's all falling apart, and they are backed against the wall. They have nowhere else to turn, and this is why we might see an event, because We're going to have to see how desperate they are, what they have planned, because we know certain things are in the works. The FBI has been having drills in amusement parks. We know that they've been pinning the cyber attacks on North Korea, saying that North Korea has the ability to shut down the power grid because they've been sending phishing emails to the power infrastructure. They've been talking about Russia and how they have malware in our financial institutions, how the Islamic State is coming to get us with physical attacks. So you can see they've been preparing for this. They've been pushing their agenda, and it looks like it's just a matter of time. Now, it can go either way. The whole system can just completely fall apart. These people are arrested. They're put on trial. And we just clean our hands of them. But I don't think they're going to let that happen. I think they're just going to go all out and say, you know what? You're not catching us. We're going to have this one big event, and we're going to distract everyone. They've done it in the past, and they can do it again.